Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 item guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we are covering my pick for the 20 best items in Baldur's Gate 3 in Act 2 of Honor Mode. Just like in part 1 of this video, I'm covering equippable items in this video, so not consumables or weapons, which I'll cover in a separate series, and we're looking at the 20 best items in the game for Act 2. I've already explained my criteria for ranking these items and everything, so if you haven't seen part 1 of the video, then definitely go refer to that, and you will get more of a detailed explanation of how we're approaching these rankings, and for more detailed explanations of each of the items and the ones that didn't make the list, definitely go check out the many hours of tier lists in which I have covered every single equippable item in the game. We're using exactly the same ranking criteria, so best in this context means the item that wins you the game most easily, the one that goes on the widest variety of builds, and is the most powerful for the builds that it goes on. And other than that, let's just get right into ranking. I'm going to start with not one, but 2 honorable mentions. There's a couple items that, despite not making the top 20 list, I think are very much worth paying attention to in Act 2. The first of these is Ketheric's Shield. This is one of the items that I probably have equipped the most times in the game, so it might surprise longtime viewers of the channel who've seen me recommend this item in almost every build guide, that it didn't make the top 20 list in Act 2. Ketheric's Shield gives you +2 to your armor class, just like almost every other shield, advantage on dex saves, which is a minor bonus, but a nice one to have for characters that have this item equipped, and the Shield Blow reaction to knock enemies prone. Shield Blow is pretty powerful because you can react with it to knock an enemy prone in the middle of their turn, costing them the rest of their turn, and the dexterity saving throw you will likely be pretty good at because I believe even in patch 7, it's still bugged and uses the character's spell save DC rather than their maneuver DC, so spellcasters who want Ketheric's Shield equipped are more likely to knock enemies prone with the Shield Bash reaction. The real bonus of Ketheric's Shield, though, is that it gives you +1 to your spell save DC and spell attack rolls. Increases to these effects are some of the most powerful things that an item can give you for a spellcaster. Bonuses to your save DC are both hard to come by and incredibly important for spellcasters, and so as soon as you get Ketheric's Shield, any spellcaster with shield proficiency, which will be a lot of them because a lot of characters get free shield proficiency from their race, will almost certainly have Ketheric's Shield equipped for the rest of the game. The reason that I don't think it cracks the top 20 for Act 2 items is that it shows up at the very end of Act 2, as you might be able to guess from the name. For that reason, while it's a very powerful item that you're going to keep equipped for the entire game after getting it, its impact on your chances of winning is a little bit lower than some of the other 20 of the other Act 2 items on the list, just because of where it shows up and how late you get this during a playthrough. Ketheric's Shield is an incredibly powerful and important item, one you should definitely pay attention to, but just misses out on the top 20 because of where it shows up in the act. The second honorable mention, the Eversight Ring. The Eversight Ring gives you blind immunity, which is immunity to a powerful but relatively situational effect. There aren't a lot of enemies in the game that blind you, so you might look at the Eversight Ring and think, this doesn't give you a lot of value because it's preventing an effect that you can usually either avoid, that's rare for enemies to try to apply, or just move out of the effect if it's caused by a cloud spell. The reason that the Eversight Ring is so good is if you've built your party around using it. And that's why I'm putting it as an honorable mention rather than a top 20 item, because you have to structure your party and your playstyle around using the Eversight Ring. The blind immunity of the Eversight Ring makes you immune to the blindness effect of your own fog clouds and your own darkness spells. And in addition to that, it works the same as the Warlock's Devilsight Invocation, letting you shoot into and out of clouds of darkness with impunity. So you basically get 2 levels of Warlock for Devilsight when you equip the Eversight Ring. For parties that are using darkness effects or lots of fog clouds, this is an invaluable tool and prevents you from having to take 2 levels of Warlock on builds that don't want to, while still operating at full effectiveness in a darkness party. Having the Eversight Ring equipped on a character lets them abuse darkness to the maximum effect, and darkness is one of the most powerful strategies in Baldur's Gate 3. It's the most powerful defensive tool in the game, in my opinion, because it makes you completely immune to enemy ranged attacks. There's no saving throw or anything. Enemies simply cannot attack characters in Darkness Clouds with ranged weapons, or ranged attacks in general. So the fact that it gives you that complete immunity makes it ridiculously powerful. The Eversight Ring opens up that strategy to more parties, but unless you've structured your party and strategy around using this item, it won't be particularly effective. So if you're just like picking it up on a random party, it's not going to do that much. But if you build your strategy around using darkness, the Eversight Ring is perhaps the single most impactful item on this list and would show up at like number 1 or 2 for darkness parties specifically. It's also worth noting with the Eversight Ring, it's one of the only items in the game that can't be spawned in using third-party tools like the Baldur's Gate script extender. So if you want to use it in your run, you have to actually make sure you pick it up where it shows up in the game, rather than relying on cheating it in if you happen to forget to grab it. So just worth keeping that in mind when you're doing a playthrough. And with the honorable mentions complete, weighing in at number 20, the Circlet of Hunting. The Circlet of Hunting gives you a plus 1d4 bonus to your attack rolls against creatures that are marked by Hunter's Mark, True Strike, Fairy Fire, or Guiding Bolt. You can probably imagine which of these 4 spells we're going to use to trigger the Circlet of Hunting's effect, and it's shockingly not True Strike. For a ranger who's using Hunter's Mark, or a character with Grimm's Helm equipped, which lets you cast Hunter's Mark once per day, the Circlet of Hunting is effectively a plus 1d4 bonus to your attack rolls all the time. As long as you're using Hunter's Mark on an enemy, the Circlet of Hunting gives you a free Bless, which stacks with the effects of the actual Bless spell, or of the Whispering Promise Ring, which we talked about in Act 1 items, in order to make your attacks vastly more likely to hit. This is especially good for archery characters because archers will often be using Sharpshooter, and so taking a penalty to their chance to hit. With the bonus damage that you get from Sharpshooter, all you need in order to make your character effective is increased hit chance, and the Circlet of Hunting is a very efficient way to generate increased hit chance. Combined with Bless, it totally counteracts the effects of the Sharpshooter penalty, and allows you to just hit your shots, which is really, really important for archery characters. Also very important for melee characters, though typically the Circlet of Hunting is going to see use on archers. It also has notable synergy with the legendary bow that you get in Act 3, which casts Guiding Bolt on everything you shoot. That will trigger the bonus of the Circlet of Hunting automatically. Less important in general than just the fact that it gives you an extra d4 to your attack roll against Hunter's Marked targets, but still something worth considering when you're looking at the Circlet of Hunting. It's hard to overstate how good bonuses to your hit chance are. Just increasing your chance to hit enemies is really, really powerful, because every time you miss, you've effectively stunned yourself for that turn. If you miss your attacks in a round, you might as well have not taken a turn at all. So increasing your chance to hit means more turns that you get to take where you actually do something, and fewer turns that your enemies get to take where they get to do something because they're dead because you hit them with your attacks. The Circlet of Hunting gives you a pretty significant bonus, average plus 2.5 on your roll to hit enemies, and just makes you way more likely to hit your attacks. So for rangers, this is an invaluable tool. At number 19, the Cloak of Protection. We've already seen this effect with the Ring of Protection in Act 1, giving you +1 to your armor class and +1 to your saving throws. The Cloak of Protection is in a lot of ways even better, because Ring is a pretty important item slot with a lot of competition, so the Ring of Protection will often get bumped down on your list of rings that you want to wear by more important rings, some of which we're going to be seeing later on in this list. The Cloak of Protection, on the other hand, occupies a slot that, at the point where you get this item, almost certainly has nothing in it on several characters, and which does not have a lot of competition throughout the game. So this powerful benefit is effectively free for whatever character is wearing the Cloak of Protection, with basically no opportunity cost. +1 to your armor class and saving throws sounds like a small bonus, but is worth a lot. Because again, anytime an enemy fails an attack against you, they've effectively stunned themselves. So it's the opposite of the Circlet of Hunting, in that it costs your enemy's action economy when you have high armor class. It, just like the Ring of Protection, it's especially good for characters with notably low AC to bring up the average armor class of your party, make enemies more likely to miss any attack that they make, or characters with very high AC to make that character specifically very, very hard to hurt with physical attacks. But of course, the Cloak of Protection can just go on anybody for a significant benefit. Coming in at number 18, the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets. DJ Gauntlet, in addition to being my rapper name, gives you an additional 1d4 necrotic damage on all of your weapon attacks. There's also a rare version of this item, the rare Dark Justiciar Gauntlets, that gives you a spell in addition to this. It's a relatively minor spell, so I'm using the uncommon version of the item here because I think it will have more of an impact on most playthroughs, since you get it a little bit earlier on. But both of those items will show up at roughly number 18 in this list, so they're kind of interchangeable. The Dark Justiciar Gauntlets are excellent for any character that's making weapon attacks. In particular, if you are making multiple weapon attacks in a round to apply this 1d4 necrotic damage as often as possible, then you're going to get an enormous amount of value out of the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets. Extra damage dice on your attacks are very powerful for a number of reasons. Firstly, of course, you do more damage, which sounds obvious, but is very important because that can make the difference between killing an enemy in one attack or taking two. It also, because this is an extra d4 of damage, means that if you critically hit, it's doubled. So for critical hit builds, this is especially good because you're going to get additional value out of this d4. It also has the effect of diversifying your damage types. A character that's making physical attacks with, let's say, a bludgeoning weapon, plus the necrotic damage from the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets, and is less likely to have an enemy that resists all of the damage that they're doing. So if you are diversifying your damage types, you're more likely to be able to attack an enemy and not have them resist that type of damage, since you're doing multiple kinds. So all of those things together make these an amazing item for any weapon attacker, increasing your damage output dramatically. The reason they're not higher on the list is just that there's a lot of competition for the glove slot. It's one of the most powerful slots in the game. But these are still a tremendously effective tool for any character making weapon attacks, especially if you're making lots of them, and especially if you're making lots of critical hits. Coming in at number 17, the Shadow-Cloaked Ring. The Shadow-Cloaked Ring causes you to deal an extra 1d4 damage against obscured enemies, with both weapon and unarmed attacks. Obscured enemies are enemies that are in areas of darkness, which you can create, or unlit areas on the battlefield, which you can create pretty easily, either by extinguishing lights while moving around in stealth before entering combat, extinguishing lights during combat by splashing water on lit torches and stuff like that. Or just by creating areas of darkness with effects that do that, like fog cloud or darkness, which create unlit areas, so you'll be able to attack enemies with the bonus from the Shadow-Cloaked Ring. I've already talked about why an additional d4 of damage is so good with the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets, and the Shadow-Cloaked Ring is the same thing, but slightly more situational. The reason it ranks one above the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets is twofold. One, it works for unarmed attacks, so you can use this on a monk as well. And two, the ring slot, you get 8 of them, so it takes up a less important item slot than the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets do. Either way, though, you're getting a ton of additional damage for multi-attacking characters, critical hit-based characters, and damage dealers. It's very easy to trigger the effect of the Shadow-Cloaked Ring, especially good for parties that are built around darkness, because you will always be able to render an enemy unlit and trigger the effect, but definitely not necessary. Almost any party can make use of the Shadow-Cloaked Ring. It's very easy to force enemies to be unlit, and very much worth doing, because the amount of bonus damage that you get from this item is incredible. And coming in at number 16, the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail. The Yuan-Ti Scale Mail is a 15 AC medium armor, but unlike other medium armors, rather than being capped at only using +2 of your dexterity bonus to increase your armor class, you can use your entire dexterity bonus as though it was light armor. The Yuan-Ti scale mail and other medium armors like it basically invalidate light armors. Something that you're going to notice on this list is that there were no light armors in Act 1 that made the top 20, and there are, spoilers, no light armors in Act 2 that make the top 20. And the Yuan-Ti scale mail is part of why, because almost any character that would want light armor should strive to get medium armor proficiency so they can wear this item. 15 armor class plus your full dexterity modifier if you're a dex character gives you a base AC of 20, which is better than any heavy armor available in this act, so you're going to have the highest armor class in the game when using this combination. And in addition to being an incredible armor class piece, the Yuan-Ti scale mail also gives you a +1 bonus to your initiative rolls. Going first is one of the most important things in Baldur's Gate combat, because if you go first, enemies often don't get to go second at all, because they are dead. So the Yuan-Ti scale mail helps you win initiative, gives you extremely high armor class, and does so all in a very easy-to-use package for the characters that want to use it. It also doesn't give you disadvantage on stealth checks, which some medium armors do, so it's especially good for characters that are making stealth checks, like stealth archers who want to win initiative and attack before the enemy goes, while making stealth checks in order to remain unseen potentially. But for any high dexterity character, the Yuan-Ti scale mail is incredibly important, and also any medium armor character can make use of this. A 15 AC medium armor is not, even if you only have 14 or 16 dexterity, is a totally reasonable effect, and getting a +1 bonus to your initiative on your chest slot is very valuable for a lot of characters. For example, a cleric with 16 dexterity gets good armor class and a +4 initiative bonus when they have the Yuan-Ti scale mail equipped, which can mean not having to take alert or not having to equip other initiative gear. So this item just provides everything you want in a single package. At number 15, the Luminous Gloves. The Luminous Gloves give you yet another source of radiating orbs. In this case, whenever you deal radiant damage, you afflict radiating orbs for 2 turns to the enemy. Radiating orbs gives enemies a -1 penalty on their attack rolls for every turn remaining. So if you deal, let's say, 3 instances of radiant damage, enemies will have a -6 penalty on their attack rolls, then it'll tick down to -5, and then -4, etc., but they won't get to that point because you'll have killed them by then. Radiating orbs are one of the most powerful strategies that you can use in Baldur's Gate 3. It's a completely busted mechanic, and stacking them up to 10, the maximum, is very easy to do with a couple pieces of radiant gear, like the Luminous Gloves and the Luminous Armor that we saw as number 2 on the Act 1 list of top 20 items. The Luminous Gloves, it might surprise you that a Radiating Orb item is all the way down at number 15, despite, of course, that being incredibly high. The reason for that is that they conflict with another set of gloves that a lot of the characters who would want this effect will be using, the Gloves of Belligerent Skies. That item missed the top 20 list in my Act 1 items just barely, but the Luminous Gloves, a lot of characters that are built around Radiating Orbs are also built around Reverberation, so many of those characters will still be using the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, rather than equipping the Luminous Gloves. However, any character that can deal any amount of radiant damage can use the Luminous Gloves to devastating effect, reducing enemy attack rolls. You can use this to allow some characters to stack up Radiating Orbs to 10 in a single action. Of course, it's incredible for clerics using Spirit Guardians to stack Radiating Orbs. It's incredible for paladins who use their smites to stack Radiating Orbs. Any character that can deal radiant damage can use the Luminous Gloves. The only conflict is that they prevent you from using the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, which often those characters want instead. So, amazing item, slight tension as to which of those 2 items you equip. And coming in at number 14, the Flawed Helldusk Gloves, yet another set of gloves. The Flawed Helldusk Gloves give you an additional D4 fire damage on your weapon attacks, or D4 necrotic damage on your unarmed attacks, and with unarmed attacks, you inflict bleeding. These are generally, I think, better than the Dark Justiciar gauntlets because you get them earlier in the act, so you're going to have them for a little bit longer. But also, fire damage has a lot of synergy that necrotic damage doesn't. There's a lot of items in the game that care about dealing fire damage, and so you can use the Flawed Helldusk Gloves to trigger those items. These are, once again, incredibly powerful for characters that attack multiple times in a turn, and any character that wants to do damage, but of course, unlike the Dark Justiciar gauntlets, these also work for a monk who's making unarmed attacks, or any other form of unarmed attacker. In particular, these are good if you have items that care about dealing fire damage, but also if you are doing unarmed attacks that care about inflicting bleeding, then the Flawed Helldusk Gloves are good for that as well. There is a hidden saving throw. It's a DC 13 saving throw for enemies to resist the bleed for Constitution. So the bleeding will not be 100% reliable. In fact, it's unlikely to occur on any given attack. But if you're attacking frequently, you can inflict it a lot. And if you have bleed synergy, which a lot of parties are built around, then the Flawed Helldusk Gloves will enable that even more. This item is just the best version of these extra damage on your attacks item available in Act 2, and that's a very powerful type of item to be. So, number 14 for the Flawed Helldusk Gloves. At number 13, the Snowburst Ring. The Snowburst Ring gives characters, whenever they deal cold damage, they also create a 15-foot circle of ice around the target of the cold damage. This is a passive effect. It can trigger multiple times per turn if you're dealing cold damage multiple times in a turn. So you can create a lot of ice surfaces if you're dealing cold damage. The Snowburst Ring is incredibly powerful because ice surfaces in Baldur's Gate are ludicrously strong. Enemies who are on an ice surface have a chance of falling over when it's created, and then another chance of falling over when they move. And if they fall over on their own turn, they lose the rest of their turn. The AI will typically move before it acts, and so the Snowburst Ring will often yield just constant stun after stun after stun on enemies who will move, fall over, and lose the rest of their actions for that turn. It does so passively, and so any character that's set up to make use of this can create tons of ice surfaces under enemies, which can crowd control entire encounters all by itself. The reason that it isn't a little higher on the list is that you do have to be dealing constant cold damage, and there's lots of other ways in the game to create grease or ice surfaces. So the Snowburst Ring does something extremely powerful while doing other stuff, in other words, dealing cold damage, but not something that is impossible to reach in other ways. It's especially good for characters that are built around dealing cold damage, and in particular, it's good for archers who can use any weapon that deals cold damage, which you can create with the Drakethroat Glaive, also available in Act 2, can make your bow deal cold damage, and then when you fire an arrow, it will create an ice circle under the target. So the Snowburst Ring is incredible for archers, incredible for cold-themed casters, or just any caster that deals cold damage. Also, super powerful for Abjuration Wizards, who, when using Armor of Agathys to tank enemy attacks, will create ice surfaces under those enemies with the retaliation damage from the armor. You will need a way to be immune to the ice surface yourself in order to use it in melee range, either with Armor of Agathys or with a cold damage melee weapon. But if you are, then you can just create ice surfaces under yourself, stand on them, enemies fall over, and everything is great because you have advantage on subsequent attacks and they lose turns and everything along those lines. The Snowburst Ring is another item that you do have to build around a little bit. It can be dangerous in an all-melee party. You need to be able to consistently deal the cold damage to make use of its effects. But if you have built a character around using this ring, or if a character is built in such a way as to use this ring effectively, which is more characters than you might think, then the Snowburst Ring is going to be awesome. At number 12, the Justiciar's Greatshield. The Justiciar's Greatshield is another +2 armor class shield, so at base it gives you +2 armor class when it's equipped, and it has shield blow and advantage on perception checks. Shield blow, I've already talked about why this is such a powerful effect, knocking over enemies during their turn and so on, stunning them for the rest of the turn. But the big thing is that it gives you a short rest cooldown cast of Darkness as a bonus action. The Darkness Cloak effect gives you a bonus action cast of Darkness, It only lasts for 2 turns, and it's smaller than the Darkness spell, but it's cast as a bonus action, and you get to immediately hide. Bonus action hide is super powerful because it stops enemies from retaliating when you attack them, and so having bonus action hide on any character, not just on a rogue, is going to be incredibly useful for any character that wants to remain opposed by enemies. In particular, this is very good for archers who can hide away from enemies and then shoot without being retaliated against, but amazing for any character that wants to operate at range, or any character that is using darkness itself, because this is also just a short rest cast of darkness, which is quite good in and of itself. Darkness without spending a full action is awesome, so the Justiciar's Greatshield has a ton of utility for a wide variety of characters, and even if you aren't themed around using the darkness effect, the fact that it creates darkness, which makes you immune to enemy ranged attacks, even if you then blind yourself, that's fine. You're still immune to enemy ranged attacks, and you hide. And the hide is almost always going to succeed without having to roll a stealth check, because you are now inside the cloud of darkness in an unlit area, so enemies don't have line of sight against you. Enemies with dark vision can circumvent this, even if it's non-magical dark vision. The way that darkness works in Baldur's Gate is a little weird, so non-magical dark vision can still see hiding creatures inside of the magical darkness effect. But even so, a lot of enemies just won't be able to see you when you pop the cloud out of the Justiciar's Greatshield and take your bonus action hide, and darkness as a bonus action is an amazing panic button against ranged attackers. This item lets you control the battlefield and stop enemies from doing stuff in an enormous variety of ways, while also just being a powerful shield. Great item for the Justiciar's Greatshield. Anyone can use it, but especially darkness users and archers will get a ton of utility out of it. At number 11, just shy of the top 10, and this should give you some idea of how powerful the top 10 items in Act 2 are, the Gloves of the Automaton. The Gloves of the Automaton give you, as a bonus action, once per short rest, you can gain 10 turns of just your attacks have advantage on every attack. This only works on weapon attacks, so you do have to be a weapon user. Doesn't work for monks, but any other character that's making, or spellcasters making spell attacks, any other character that's making weapon attacks can gain constant advantage for a fight once per short rest, which should be most important fights in a given adventuring day. The Gloves of the Automaton give you a tremendously powerful effect. Advantage, obviously, is great for all of the obvious reasons. It makes it easier for you to hit your attacks. But it also has a couple other more subtle effects. It makes you more likely to critically hit, so it's really good for critical hit users. It also removes randomness from the combat. It makes it much less likely for you to miss an attack against a low AC enemy, so you can plan your attacks much more reliably and plan your turns much more detail and with much more certainty that they're going to go how you planned. So not only does this item make your characters just inherently more powerful by hitting their attacks more often, you also just get a lot of more information about how the combat is going to go, because you're less likely to be exposed to negative randomness or bad variance that makes your attacks miss. You also gain resistance to lightning damage, which isn't a tremendous benefit, but is nice for some encounters, and resistances are always powerful. Taking half damage from enemies is really good, so any enemy that has lightning damage, this will benefit you against, but mostly this is for the advantage. And you can use the construct-only weapon. By this point in the game, that's not a huge benefit, because it's kind of outclassed by other weapon options, so mostly this is just as a bonus action, gain advantage on all of your attacks for 10 turns, so you just get permanent advantage on a weapon user. Yeah, any weapon user wants these. These are going to be best in slot for characters that are making weapon attacks. And entering the top 10. I should mention also that while I think it was a little easier for me to whittle down the Act 2 items to a top 20, the order of the Act 2 items was much harder for me to decide on than the Act 1 items. I think these items are a lot closer together in power level. And The Act 2 items are often about specializing your character, so what order you place these items in will depend a lot on what builds you're running and your sort of personal playstyle and preferences. So it was really interesting to try to rate especially the top 10 items in order, given that they will often be used by very different characters. But coming in at number 10, the Coruscation Ring. The Coruscation Ring is another radiating orb effect, and one of the easiest ones to use because it just takes a ring slot. Whenever you deal spell damage, while illuminated by a light source, except that you don't actually have to be illuminated by a light source, that part of it is bugged, so you just don't need to be illuminated. The Coruscation Ring inflicts 2 turns of radiating orb on the enemy. Obviously, this is a little more restrictive in most cases than dealing radiant damage, because you have to actually deal spell damage, but luckily, the best way to deal spell damage and the best way to deal radiant damage are the same thing, which is Spirit Guardians, which does both at the same time. The Coruscation Ring helps you stack Radiating Orb to the maximum very, very quickly. With this and the Luminous Armor, 2 turns of or 2 ticks of Spirit Guardians is enough to get enemies to the maximum, and enemies will always take 2 ticks of Spirit Guardian damage because they take it when you cast it and at the beginning of their turn. So the Coruscation Ring is going to stack enemies to the maximum level of Radiating Orb immediately when it's added to any other Radiating Orb effect. For that reason, this item is going to prevent enemies from attacking you effectively at all. Enemies who take a -10 penalty on their attack rolls simply can't do anything. And so this will let you just ignore almost all the bosses in the game. Very few enemies in Baldur's Gate actually don't use attack rolls in some way, and so a -10 penalty, making them unable to hit their rolls, just overpowers the game entirely. Radiating Orb just solves encounters all by itself. Obviously, this is best for Radiating Orb characters who are built around abusing this effect, and for clerics who can use this alongside Spirit Guardians and the Luminous Armor and everything to do the whole Radiating Orb build. But any spellcaster can benefit from the Coruscation Ring, even if you aren't building around Radiating Orbs. If you add just like a little bit of attack penalty to any spell, let's say you put up a Wall of Fire and enemies take a -2 penalty when you place it, and then another -2 at the start of their turn. -4 on their attacks is a ridiculous amount of malice that you're putting on their attacks. So the Coruscation Ring is good with synergy with other items, and also incredible on its own, one of the most powerful effects in the game. At number 9, the Hat of Storm Scion's Power. This is another one that will probably surprise people for being so low on the list. The Hat of Storm Scion's Power gives you, whenever you deal thunder damage, you gain Arcane Acuity. It doesn't say in the tooltip, but it's 2 turns of Arcane Acuity. Arcane Acuity is similar to Radiating Orb. It's a stack that increases in power the more stacks you have on yourself. In this case, for every turn remaining of Arcane Acuity, you gain a +1 bonus to your spell attack rolls and spell save DCs. A +1 bonus to your spell save DCs is an incredible thing. I've talked already about how Ketheric's Shield is one of the best items in the game. Well, the Hat of Storm Scion's Power can stack Arcane Acuity up to huge numbers that can prevent enemies from ever passing their saving throws. As long as you can consistently deal thunder damage, your spells will never miss, and enemies will never succeed on their saves. The Baldur's Gate actually makes this even more powerful, because enemies don't auto-succeed on saving throws on critical hits, so if your save DC is high enough, they will have a 0% chance of saving, and it's very easy to stack Arcane Acuity to the point where enemies cannot physically succeed on the saves, where you completely overpower legendary resistances from the bosses, and so Arcane Acuity just absolutely breaks the game in half. I went on a big rant about how this is a problematic mechanic in my tier list for the Act 2 helmets, where I talk about Arcane Acuity. So you can go check out that rant. I won't reiterate it here in this top 20 list, but I will suffice to say that Arcane Acuity breaks the game by ending encounters without enemies being able to do anything, and is one of the absolute most powerful things that you can do, because it just completely breaks game balance. The Hat of Storm Scion's power is a little lower on the list than the other Arcane Acuity items because thunder damage is a little harder to do in large multiples of thunder damage. You have to build around the Hat of Storm Scion's power in a way you don't with the other Arcane Acuity items. But if you do, of course, you're going to end up with a ridiculously powerful character. So this works for any build that's built around thunder damage, means your spells will always land, means that your spell attacks will always hit, and enemies won't be able to resist. It's good for any spellcaster who can deal thunder damage. It's good for weapon attackers who also cast spells, because you can make your weapon deal thunder damage or use a thunder damage weapon to stack this very easily. And there's some specific item combos with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel that let you really abuse this, and with items that allow you to add extra thunder damage. Also really good on reverberation builds which want to deal thunder damage anyways. So the Hat of Storm Scion's power, one of the absolute most broken effects in the game. A little lower on the list just because it shows up on fewer builds than the other Arcane Acuity items, which, spoilers, are coming up higher up on this list. But still an incredible effect and absolutely worth building your party around making use of, because it will win you every encounter that you face quite easily. Coming in at number 8, the Callous Glow Ring. The Callous Glow Ring is very similar to the Caustic Band, which we saw in Act 1, except that it deals an additional 2 points of radiant damage rather than acid damage. Enemies have to be illuminated to get the extra radiant damage here, so it might at first glance seem odd that I've rated the Callous Glow Ring, which is a situational effect that's similar to an Act 1 ring, so highly. But the fact that this is radiant damage is incredibly important. The reason for this, of course, is radiating orbs. Any character that deals radiant damage reliably can stack radiating orbs extremely effectively with the Luminous Gloves, with the Luminous Armor. So the Callous Glow Ring is part of the core combination of the Luminous Armor, the Callous Glow Ring, the Coruscation Ring, and either the Luminous Gloves or the Reverberation items that make up the classic Radiating Orb build, and allows you to just absolutely flatten encounters by rendering enemies helpless to attack you back. In addition to that, it's also just good damage. The Callous Glow Ring deals 2 extra radiant damage on every single source of damage you do. It's not just on attacks, it's not just on weapon attacks or spells or anything like that. If you hit an enemy with a weapon, plus 2 damage. If you cast a spell, plus 2 damage. If an enemy stands in your wall of fire, plus 2 damage. Over and over and over and over again. On difficulty levels below Honor Mode also, this is one of the items that is bugged with Damage Rider source issues, where the Callous Glow Ring can trigger as a damage rider on one of your attacks, and then itself trigger other damage riders, and then trigger as a rider on those riders to help stack damage to nonsensically high levels. But even without those effects, the Callous Glow Ring is going to deal tons of extra damage every turn, and it's radiant damage, which lets you stack Radiating Orb. It also lets builds who wouldn't normally be able to use Radiating Orb, like let's say a weapon attacker like a rogue, who wouldn't normally deal radiant damage, and so they can use Radiating Orb as well now. So not only is this incredibly powerful for the sort of core cleric build with Radiating Orb, it also works for any other character and lets them stack that extraordinarily strong effect very easily while dealing a whole bunch of additional damage. You'll also see it show up in like magic missile builds because it applies on every tick of the magic missile, in Scorching Ray builds, because it applies to every ray of the Scorching Ray, in Eldritch Blast builds, because it applies on every ray of the Eldritch Blast, and so on. You get the idea. This item just works with everything to do a bunch of damage, and then also enables a whole pile of synergies on its own. So it's really good for Radiating Orb, really good for multi-attackers, really good for damage dealers, really good for anybody. Coming in at number 7, the Fistbreaker Helm. The Fistbreaker Helm gives you a +1 to your spell save DC and a +1 to your initiative. The reason that this is rated higher than the Hat of Storm Scion's power, which is sort of the obvious question, because this gives you obviously a lot less initiative, or a lot less spell save DC than the Arcane Acuity helmets do, is just that it can go on literally any build. Any spellcaster can use a bonus to your initiative and a bonus to your save DCs, and it will enable that character to be wildly stronger. Initiative is the most important stat in Baldur's Gate, and spell save DC is probably the second most important stat. This gives you both of them. Anything that a spellcaster needs in a single package is an excellent item that will be, unless you're building around Arcane Acuity, your spellcasters will all be wearing the Fistbreaker Helm for the entire game, because it's just that powerful. It's ideal for wizards, sorcerers, because it also isn't it's a helmet, but it doesn't require armor proficiency, so any character can wear it, even if you don't have armor proficiencies. And these are small bonuses. These are +1 bonuses, of course, which sound small, but they're to the most important stats, so the Fistbreaker Helm is excellent. This is just a feel-good item. It just gives you everything you need. There's not much to say about it other than the stats are great, so put it on. Coming in at number 6, the Potent Robe. The Potent Robe allows your cantrips to deal additional damage equal to your Charisma modifier. Gives you +1 to your armor class. It's a robe, so +1 to your AC is not bad, because it will stack with mage armor and shields and everything. At the beginning of each of your turns, you gain temp HP equal to your charisma. The temp HP isn't a huge benefit, though having like +5 temp HP every turn, healing for 5 every turn is certainly not something that you will sneeze at. It's a totally reasonable effect that you'll be happy to have. And the +1 armor class is great on a robe as well. But obviously the real power here is the additional damage dealt on your cantrips. The idea here, of course, is to use this on a warlock, whose cantrips include Eldritch Blast, which fires 3 rays, and each of those allows them to apply their charisma bonus for each ray. So an Eldritch Blast warlock with Agonizing Blast, which they all take, will be applying 3 shots with double their charisma on each of the 3 shots for a tremendous amount of Eldritch Blast damage. In addition to that, the Potent Robe is just a great item because there's actually not a lot of competition at this point, especially for Warlock gear, but also just for any Spellcaster gear. This is the best in slot item for Warlocks throughout the entire game, so they'll always be wearing it, but any Charisma Spellcaster can make use of this robe pretty well. I looked at this item, I think I said this in some comments and maybe in some old build guides, but when I first played through the game, through Baldur's Gate, I looked at this item when I first got it and went, wow, literally any one of these abilities on a robe would be an awesome robe, and they put all of them on the same item. This robe just gives you so much. The amount of damage that you get from the spellcasting, from charisma to spellcasting damage is incredible. The extra healing is very, very helpful, especially for a squishy character like a warlock. So the Potent Robe just smooths out your playthrough dramatically. And it's actually kind of funny because it gives you a pretty strong incentive not to play Dark Urge as a warlock so that you can get this item, because the Potent Robe is just so valuable for warlock characters. For that reason, it comes in at number 6, because any party with a warlock will be just so happy to have this item. And of course, other characters that are built around using cantrips, you can use this on a sorcerer or even on a bard to do powered up vicious mockeries, and that would be pretty funny. Obviously, the main use is for warlocks, but other spellcasters actually can use this pretty well, because plus charisma to damage on a Ray of Frost that you then double with wet is actually a lot of damage as well. So the Potent Robe has other uses, mainly for warlocks, but just incredibly powerful for them. And now we are entering the top 5. Weighing in at number 5, the Hat of Fire Acuity. We knew this one was coming because it's another one of the Arcane Acuity items, and so I have placed it at number 5. The Hat of Fire Acuity is identical to the Hat of Storm Scion's power in that it gives you 2 turns of Arcane Acuity whenever you deal fire damage, so it works exactly the same except it triggers off of fire damage instead of off of thunder damage. Fire damage is easier to deal than thunder damage, which is why it shows up higher on the list, and in particular, fire damage has a ton of synergy because one of the ways to deal lots of instances of damage in the game, to stack this really fast, is Scorching Ray. Firing lots of Scorching Rays will stack your Arcane Acuity to maximum instantly, and the bonus to hit chance will mean that future Scorching Rays will hit harder. Or you can then follow up with a control spell to lock down enemies. So fire sorcerers built around this item are incredibly common, of course. You fire a high-level Scorching Ray to deal a ton of damage. If you're like a Draconic sorcerer that can add their charisma to each ray as well, you deal massive amounts of damage, and you never miss your attacks because the Hat of Fire Acuity gives you such high chances to hit. But also, any character that deals regular fire damage can use the Hat of Fire Acuity. It's also very, very easy to get weapons that deal fire damage. There's both a lot of those in the game already that just deal fire damage by default, and most weapons can be dipped in fire to allow you to deal fire damage with the Hat of Fire Acuity to stack Arcane Acuity. You can set up a candle on the ground, dip your weapon in it, fire, gain stacks of Arcane Acuity, and then either with a haste action or a bonus action with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, cast a powerful control spell. This lets weapon attackers who haven't even invested anything into increasing their spell save DC have higher save DCs than casters. It lets casters have unbeatable save DCs that enemies cannot possibly pass. Arcane Acuity just lets you instantly win encounters, and the Hat of Fire Acuity is a great way to build it. It's not the best way to build it, but for characters that are built around it, it definitely is, and for the extremely powerful Fire Sorcerer builds, this is the key item that makes those builds not only work, because they would work anyways, but just absolutely rock Honor Mode by having hit chance and spell save chances that enemies simply can't deal with. At number 4, the Spellcrux Amulet. The Spellcrux Amulet lets you, as a bonus action, replenish a spent spell slot. This can be any level of spell slot, so needless to say, you're mostly going to use this on 6th level spells, and once per long rest, you can restore it. Now, I should say, I've rated the Spellcrux Amulet very high, because I tend to take long adventuring days. If you rest after every combat, then the Spellcrux Amulet will show up lower down on the list. If you long rest after every combat and restore your spell slots after every combat, the Spellcrux Amulet won't be quite this high. If you take lots of encounters in a day, like I do, then the Spellcrux Amulet is invaluable. Not to mention, the Spellcrux Amulet is really good even if you rest frequently, because this effect is once per long rest and lets you Nova even harder than you would be able to if you were just resting frequently already. Notice that the spell slot replenishment is a bonus action, so you can cast a 6th level spell, let's say a Chain Lightning, bonus action to restore that, and then with a hasted action, cast a second Chain Lightning. So the Spellcrux Amulet both lets you have greater longevity in your adventuring days by having more 6th level spells per day, and also lets you have much higher Nova potential, much higher burst potential in a given encounter because you can restore the spell slot as a bonus action. The fact that this is a bonus action makes it very usable in combat, so don't forget that you can restore your 6th level spells to recast them. The standard use for a lot of characters with this is going to be to cast a day-long buff, like Hero's Feast, or one of the level 6 summons, like the Summon Deva, the Summon Jin, or the Conjure Elemental upgrade, and then refresh their spells so they still have a 6th level combat spell, or cast another one of the day-long buffs. And that's one of the best ways to use these spell slot refreshing items, is to be able to cast multiple day-long buffs in a day, or cast a day-long buff and then still benefit from a really powerful combat spell, a 6th level combat spell. But also, characters can use them to just Nova with multiple 6th level spells in a turn. They can use them to just take more encounters in a day if they need their 6th level spell slots to do that. Really powerful for characters like Fire Sorcerers that want high level Scorching Rays, characters like the Lightning Lord build that I posted again recently. I posted the remastered version of that again recently that wants high level spells. Just lets you go for longer and be wildly more powerful in the encounters that you are in, and 6th level spell slots are an incredibly potent resource and a very valuable one. This gives you one back. Obviously, you want that. And coming in at number 3, one of my very favorite items in the entire game, the Sentinel Shield. The Sentinel Shield is a shield, gives you +2 to your armor class, and the shield blow reaction, which of course is very relevant, like we've talked about with the other shields on this list, and a +3 bonus to your initiative rolls. Advantage on perception checks is a nice minor bonus as well, but +3 to your initiative from the shield slot is an absurd amount of bonus initiative. As you have seen, as we've gone through these items already, and if you've watched the tier lists and everything, one of the most powerful things that you can possibly do in Baldur's Gate is increase your initiative. If you go before the enemies often will not get to go themselves because they'll be dead. The Sentinel Shield gives you a +3 bonus to your initiative. This is especially powerful because of how the initiative system in Baldur's Gate 3 works. Initiative in Baldur's Gate, in tabletop initiative, is rolled on a 20-sided die, a d20, then you add your initiative bonus. In Baldur's Gate, it's rolled on a d4, a 4-sided die. That means that bonuses to initiative are not quite 5 times as powerful, but it can be helpful to think of them as being roughly 5 times as powerful as the equivalent bonus would be in tabletop. The Sentinel Shield is already an amazing item in tabletop, similar to like the Alert feat, which is already a very good feat in tabletop D&D. But in Baldur's Gate, this means that you never lose initiative. Being able to guarantee that you go before the enemies not only means that you get the first turn, so you can kill them before they can act, you can lock them down before they can act, etc. It also, as I've mentioned before, makes your strategic planning much easier. In addition to that, in Baldur's Gate, the way the initiative system works, if your whole party wins initiative, you can mix and match actions between your party members in order to generate the optimal strategic combinations. So every character winning initiative is exponentially more powerful than just one character winning initiative. Not only is initiative good on its own, it synergizes with other characters with initiative. This lets you have the Sentinel Shield lets you have all of your party members have the highest initiative, even if this is a build that wasn't able to take alert, even if it was a build that had low dexterity, or wasn't able to invest in other initiative gear, because a +3 bonus will just solve all of your initiative problems by itself. For that reason, this item is just critical to any party, and it's going to be best in slot for any shield user basically throughout the game. This is one of the absolute best items in the game because going first is just that valuable. It lets you move stats around too if you want to reduce your dexterity and put it elsewhere. It potentially lets you skip alert or on builds that don't want it or multi-class or heavily multi-classed. It lets you go before even the fastest enemies in the game. Initiative is great. The Sentinel Shield gives you a ton of it. Obviously, put that on. And weighing in at number 2, I expect that this item showed up as number 1 on a lot of people's lists if you sort of made your own list before watching this video, but I think you probably won't be surprised by the item that shows up at number 1. Weighing in at number 2, the Risky Ring. The Risky Ring gives you advantage on all of your attack rolls. Permanent, passive advantage on every attack. It doesn't have to be weapon attacks, it can be unarmed attacks, it can be spell attacks. You have advantage on every single attack that you make in the entire game. There is a downside to this item, though. You have disadvantage on your saving throws. Now, I think there's a bit of a pathology in sort of Baldur's Gate optimization where people pretend that every character has this item equipped all the time and that it has no downsides. You're going to see a lot of build guides which are like, you just have advantage on all your attacks because of the Risky Ring with no downsides. And that's not true. This is a real downside, and obviously only one person in your party gets to equip it. But the downside you can mitigate pretty easily by gaining advantage on saving throws, which there are a lot of ways to be able to do that, especially the important ones. And a lot of the characters that want the Risky Ring don't receive saving throw effects very often because they're ranged characters or they're sort of out of the way of the enemies, so they just won't get targeted by saving throw targeting effects or have other ways to break out of them. So while this disadvantage is real, it's one that you can mitigate quite easily by giving yourself bonuses or immunities to the relevant effects. And the advantage, of course, is incredibly powerful, the literal advantage. Permanent and passive advantage on all of your attack rolls. I've talked about just how good that was with the Automaton gloves, but the Risky Ring gives this to you always. It's not on a short rest cooldown, it doesn't require anything, and it works on spell attacks, it works on unarmed attacks. Any character can use the Risky Ring. Any character that's making attack rolls, which is a lot of characters in the game, gets advantage on your attacks. That means more criticals, means fewer misses, means killing enemies faster, means dying less. Enemies also can't cast spells against you to take advantage of the saving throw penalty if they're dead, and the Risky Ring helps them get dead, so it also mitigates its own downside itself. The Risky Ring is, I think, one of the most impactful items in the entire game, just because Advantage is so good in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Getting it for free always is just a ridiculously powerful effect. It's especially good on archers or backline spellcasters who can use positioning to avoid taking saving throw targeting effects. On critical hit builds who use the Advantage the best, because gaining more critical hits is a benefit of attacking with advantage all of the time. And so the Risky Ring just gives every possible character who's making any sort of attack a tremendous edge. Obviously, super powerful item. Put it on any character who's making an attack. Do be a little careful with your positioning with this item, but I assure you the downside is worth it. And we've alluded to it already, so it won't come as a surprise what item is going to go in the number 1 spot, but let's get a drum roll anyways. Drum roll, please. The number 1 item in Baldur's Gate 3 Act 2 is the Helmet of Arcane Acuity. The Helmet of Arcane Acuity is another of the Arcane Acuity items, and it's the easiest of these to trigger. It gives you 2 turns of Arcane Acuity every time you deal damage with a weapon attack. So very similar, of course, to the Hat of Storm Scion's Power or the Hat of Fire Acuity. You can stack Arcane Acuity to the point where bosses cannot pass your saving throws. But dealing damage with a weapon attack is, on the whole, an easier trigger to meet than the other two. The reason for this is that you don't need to build around a specific weapon or build around a specific spell in order to use the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, and it works very well with effects that allow you to make multiple weapon attacks in a turn, like Sword Bards, who can make 2 weapon attacks with their Slashing Flourish ranged attack, or with the multi-attacking arrows to stack your Arcane Acuity up to the maximum in a single weapon attack. You can combine that with a hasted action or a bonus action from the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel in order to cast a spell like Hold Person or Hypnotic Pattern to lock down the entire encounter or command. And so the Helmet of Arcane Acuity is just the easiest way to make use of this extraordinarily powerful effect. Arcane Acuity, I've talked already about why this is just so good, because the game is simply not balanced around enemies not being able to pass their saving throws, and this makes that a very easy condition to achieve, and the Helmet of Arcane Acuity just lets you use it extremely easily. It's best, of course, for hybrid characters that are making both weapon attacks and casting spells, but it's not required that your character actually have spellcasting to make use of this effect. You can use a scroll alongside weapon attacks and the Helmet of Arcane Acuity in order to lock down enemies, and so you can use this on just any martial character or any character that's making multiple weapon attacks. But of course, best for characters that are doing both, like Pact of the Blade Warlocks or Paladins or hybrid nature clerics that are actually attacking with their weapons, or any cleric multi-class that's attacking with its weapons, or of course, especially Sword Bards. Sword Bards are the natural home for this, and they're the most powerful class in the game. The Helmet of Arcane Acuity is an integral part, or at least an important part, of what I consider to be the single best build for Honor Mode, the Sword Bard Archer, because of how easy it is to trigger with that character and how powerful it is when you do so. You just attack with a weapon and then cast a spell with the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, all the enemies fall over, and the game becomes very, very easy. Arcane Acuity is just too powerful for the game, and that's why the Helmet of Arcane Acuity is the number 1 item in Baldur's Gate 3 Act 2. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the Act 2 items of Baldur's Gate 3, and I hope that it helps you to plan and equip your Honor Mode parties. I already mentioned that I found Act 2 a really interesting act to rate for this top 20, because I found it much easier than Act 1 to narrow down the items to only a top 20. There's obviously some items that didn't make the list that you definitely could put on the list, and I expect we'll see many of those mentioned in the comments below. But I also found it much harder than Act 1 to put the items in order. The reason for this is that Act 2 is where a lot of builds specialize. The Act 2 items allow your characters to specialize into different roles, and it's where a lot of builds actually come fully online, with their gear allowing the build to really take off. So the Act 2 items, I think, are really important because they give your characters direction and bring your build into its full power in time for the very dangerous fights that come near the end of Act 2 and into Act 3. So hopefully this helps you set up your characters to use those. As always, of course, if you think that there's something that I missed, or an item that I should move around on the list, or an item that I missed off of the list, if you think that there's something I should move around, I'm very open to any feedback or suggestions that you have. I've moved things in the past on these tier lists if there is a good argument to do so, so definitely do let me know in the comments if you think there's an item I've rated incorrectly or left off this list that really deserves to be on here. And of course, if you have enjoyed the video, then feel free to hit like and leave a comment. Both of those things help me out a ton with the algorithm. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 strategy guides, for part 3 of this series, where we're going to look at the Act 3 items, and for other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.